Hello, and welcome to the 2020-2021 Rater Reliability Compass Evaluator Training. We always want to take a moment to ground any work we do in our vision. The purpose of this Rater Reliability Training is to ensure equitable application of the evaluation process across the state, such that every child in school has the opportunity to grow and thrive. We recognize that 2020-2021 school year has presented us with unprecedented challenges and want to start this presentation with gratitude for all you are doing to surmount these challenges on behalf of the children of our state. You are all true heroes. One more logistical note before we dive in. We have several resources soon to be released that will not be linked here as they are being finalized. We'll mention those resources and policy proposals as we get to the slides that pertain to them. As always, you can reach out to us at the Compass inbox with follow-up questions. There's also posted a companion deck in the Compass library that will allow you to click on any hyperlinks you see here as we go through this presentation. That should allow you to follow along in both formats. Now, let's dig in. The objective of today is that by the end of this training, participants will be able to share a common understanding of our evaluation tools, evaluation practices, collection of evaluation data for digital and analog observations, enter the evaluation data into the system of record or the Compass information system, and articulate the impact of this data on teacher certification. We'll go over the evaluation rationale and policy continuum of evaluation and certification, elements of evaluation, including professional practice scores and student performance scores for the 2020-2021 school year, virtual considerations for observations, norming with rater reliability, our system of record, our grievance policies, and then we'll end with the survey, which will also be the confirmation of your attendance. So take a step back and take a deep breath. This has likely been an intensive startup to the school year. Let's ground ourselves in the current topic of professional staff evaluation. Take a minute to fill out your own KWL chart, either in your mind, on the screen, or on a piece of paper, so that you can track progress and the remaining questions that you have from now until the end of this presentation. I will give a brief pause for you to do this. Let's go next to evaluation law and policy. We want to start with the word compass. We use the word compass quite a bit and just want to clarify that that word can actually be subdivided into several usages and meanings. So we have compass, the entire system of staff evaluation. Then we have the compass rubric, which is the name of the rubric used by the majority of school districts for evaluation of professional practice. Finally, we have the Compass information system, which is the IT system. So CIS is the required system of record to enter both professional practice scores and student outcome scores, even if you're using a rubric that is not the Compass rubric. Now that we've outlined the three uses of the word compass, we want to remind you to look at the components and process of evaluation in law and policy. These components include defining a job description. This means determining at the LEA or school systems level who will be labeled as T for teacher, L for leader, or O for other in the CIS system. This label then determines the planning for the sequential evaluation components that you see here: professional growth planning processes, observation and data collecting processes, professional development, and support. If these components of evaluation aren't provided, professional staff may file a grievance and enter into the grievance process. You can read along with the policy here while I voice over that the purpose of evaluation, once again, is to provide support to our professional staff so they can be the very best at their jobs and therefore the very best for our students. For evaluation to be a process of professional growth, we need to implement it as a process of professional development. It's also important to denote the connection of evaluation to certification. When school personnel are evaluated by the standards of effectiveness, those scores can be entered into the Compass information system or the system of record, and the certification department can access those scores to issue and renew certificates. There is quite an impact of evaluation on certification. Per law and policy, an educator's certification can be renewed or advanced if the educator receives 3 effective evaluations in the initial or renewal period. Advancement from a level 1 to a level 2 certificate is contingent upon both effective evaluations and 3 sequential years of experience in the educator's certification area. To advance or renew a teaching or leader certificate, 3 effective evaluations are required within the validity period of that certificate. If an educator or leader is not evaluated, certification renewal or advancement is hindered or prevented. A note about this year: due to COVID-19, the 2019-2020 evaluations were waived and do not count for or against any educator. Certificates were extended by 1 year to account for this lost year in evaluations. As mentioned before, if these components and process of evaluation are not met by an LEA, a grievance can be filed. LEAs are required to have a grievance policy established to address the components of evaluation and, of due process of evaluation in Bulletin 130. That's linked in the Compass library. LEAs shall include in their local personnel evaluation plans a description of the procedures for resolving conflict and/or grievances relating to evaluation results in a fair, efficient, effective, and professional manner. And then finally, Bulletin 130 outlines the justifiable rationale for filing a grievance or appeal to an evaluation score. Failure by the LEA to adhere to the components of evaluation is a grievable matter. A couple of notes for charters. Each governing authority of a charter school annually shall evaluate every teacher and administrator employed at the school using the value-added assessment model and measures of student growth as determined by the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. Charters are beholden to the standards of effectiveness listed below. These sections include observation, SLTs, VAM, an approved rubric, extenuating circumstances clauses, and reporting requirements. Now we'll unpack the components of the elements of evaluation, starting with student outcomes. In a typical year, we measure the standards of effectiveness by professional practice scores and student outcome scores, which can be comprised of student learning targets and value-added model scores. 2020-2021 will look a bit different. This year, VAM scores are not available, so professional practice scores will remain at 50% with observations, but student outcome scores will be comprised solely of SLTs for all staff. We'll go into each component of student outcomes for 2020-2021 right now. While school level VAM will be produced, individual VAM scores will not. Let's look over this slide. Louisiana did not require standardized testing for the 2019-2020 school year due to the statewide school closures. The value-added model, most commonly known as VAM, measures student success compared to similar peers year to year using the statewide assessments. That 1 year of growth is what is traditionally used in the teacher evaluation VAM results. As I mentioned before, while there will be school level VAM produced using a skip year approach, those results cannot be produced for teachers. Because students traditionally have new teachers every year, it cannot be determined over a 2-year time span using VAM how much each of the 2 teachers ultimately contributed to a student's assessment results. This will impact the approximately 25% of teachers statewide who normally receive value-added results as 35% of the Compass evaluation. So let's go to student learning targets for teachers. This is another reminder that this is for 2020-2021 only. SLTs will account for 50% of the evaluation scores for all evaluated staff, inclusive of teachers who would typically have VAM scores. We know that setting quality growth goals for our students is a pivotal practice, regardless of circumstance. So let's take a minute to break down how this can occur not only in 2020-2021, but as best practice moving into the future. 2 SLTs will still be required this year. We recognize that this year may shuffle groups of students or the time they are learning remotely or in person. However, the general outline of an SLT formula applies regardless of delivery format. A quality SLT measures an expectation of student growth over a period of time on an approved assessment. We highly encourage you to look at formative and summative assessments you already have in place and use those to determine your SLT goals. We also encourage you to select the most consistent grouping of students over the most consistent group period of time to set these targets using this formula: X outcome and X amount of time on X assessment for X number of students. Now we're going to move to the leaders. Current policy requires one learning target for administrators to be based on overall school performance improvement in the current school year, as measured by the SPS score, and one learning target to be based on a growth in a component like English or math of the SPS score. In October 2020, a little bit after the recording of this presentation, BESE will consider an update to the policy for the 2020-2021 academic year only, which will allow learning targets to be based upon the school performance score from 2018-2019 or upon formative assessment data. So if BESE passes this proposal, formative goals for principals could include a similar format to that of teachers: X outcome and X amount of time on X assessment for X block of students. This outcome could include a subject area, an attendance goal, or perhaps a school culture goal. Or leaders could use the SPS related goals from 2018-2019 and set a goal for 2020-2021. Please stay tuned to all communication avenues for further notice on this decision. So to recap, teachers and leaders should develop SLTs no later than December 7th in order to understand teaching goals and plan for instruction accordingly. SLTs could be based on data such as performance data from the first unit or module of this school year, formative assessment data, or diagnostic data to get us started. We also have a document in the Compass Library, an SLT assessment guide, to view samples of assessments appropriate for SLTs, if that's helpful to you. All right, let's move into the component of professional practice scores. Returning to our slide, we see that our observation scores still comprise 50% of our total evaluation scores in 2020-2021. We'll take the next portion of this training to review observation cycle expectations, rubrics for observation, and professional development embedded in the observation cycle. The number of observation cycles required for professional practice scores at the time of this presentation, recorded on October 8th, is pending the BESE meeting to take place later this month. We will communicate updates as to the numbers of observations required as soon as we have them available. We should note that current policy requires that teachers and administrators are observed twice per year. In October or later in October, BESE will consider an update to the policy for this year only, the 2020-2021 year only, which would require one observation for those who earn a rating of highly effective or effective proficient on the first observation. Any teacher or administrator who earns an observation rating of ineffective or effective emerging would still be observed a second time. And once again, a reminder that the final decision on the number of observations will be announced after the BESE meeting using our usual communication channels. Also a reminder that all scores are to be entered into the CIS system. Whether your staff receives 1 or 2 observation cycles, these portions of policy are key for effective practice and remain in effect. We will see how these align to in-person and virtual observation practices or synchronous, asynchronous practice momentarily. As we have mentioned, observation cycles are an important part of professional development, and we encourage you to begin digital and in-person walkthroughs to collect data that can inform professional development needs. There are many tools available for these walkthroughs, and several more will be released throughout October, focusing on the virtual setting and housed in the Compass Library under observation tools. We know that when the observation and debrief cycle is embedded as a part of professional development, it can help professional staff to be their very best. It's recommended that this cycle occur with frequency. Regardless of formative or summative approaches, targeted, helpful, and timely feedback and follow-up maximizes the impact of your observations. Along with evaluative evidence, such as walkthrough observation data and evaluation of written work products, the most common tool used for these observations is the Compass rubric. This rubric is applicable independent of delivery format and is automatically approved, as is the NIET and class rubric. Some LEAs may choose to submit an alternative rubric waiver. These submissions should be sent for approval to compass@la.gov prior to using them for formal evaluations and resubmitted for approval each time changes are made to it. For approval, the alternate rubric should be on a 4.0 scale and meet similar performance outcomes to the Compass and NIET rubrics. As mentioned a few slides ago, all formal observation scores should be entered into the Compass information system with one exception: local personnel evaluations. These do not need to be entered into CIS, although incomplete evaluations should still be entered in CIS with code 99 signifying retirement, FMLA, etc. Educational leaders at the school system level, not evaluated by Compass, may be evaluated using local personnel evaluations to advance or renew an Ed Leader certificate. These scores do not need to be entered into CIS. Local personnel evaluations are kept on file at the district and attested to on an attestation form in the Educational Leader application packet. So let's revisit our purpose for today: to ensure equitable application of the evaluation process across the state such that every child in school has the opportunity to grow and thrive. In order to fulfill this purpose, we need to norm on practices of observation scores and thus generate rater reliability. We're going to spend the next part of this training looking at how we use the rubric. We will use the Compass teaching rubric as an example, but the general takeaways can be applied to any observation with any approved rubric being used. If you have evaluated someone in the past, take a minute to think about your tendencies. We know that often when evaluating, it's easy to norm with a high score with the rationale that your general thoughts of the staff member are in high regard, or the opposite, rating low to allow room for consistent growth. In the next part of this training, we will look carefully at the rubric indicators and supporting evidence such as walkthrough data and written work products. Observation cycles for professional practice scores ask us to plan out how to best help the educator being observed by gathering as much data as possible with some of the questions you see on the slide. For example, how will you assign evaluators and observers? What will your schedule look like? What role will walkthroughs play? How can you walk through remote learning rooms as well as in-person learning rooms? How will you know when teachers are teaching the right content and students are learning based on the delivery format? What materials and information should you gather in advance? What will you communicate with teachers regarding the feedback they will receive throughout the year? What time and space are set aside for peer collaboration? How will you use peers to support improvement? Now we're going to observe teachers in action and rate Compass rubric domains for inter-rater reliability. We'll use different domain strands and look at why they received the score they received. We're so excited that this year we will be looking at our Teachers of the Year and the videos they submitted in their application. We will also look at a virtual application and we will also look at a virtual observation and unpack the nuances that are helpful when observing virtually or observing a virtual lesson. Please take a minute to pause this video and pull up the Compass rubric so you can take notes as it helps you. It can be located in the Compass library. During each video, review the domain and component being evaluated. Using the portion of the rubric, you will then rate the educator from the video. Examine each component of the strand with care. What is the dominant descriptor of what you see? Note whether you are rating the video above or below the rating that we reveal at the end of each video. The first domain of the Compass rubric we will explore is Domain 3, Component 3B, Instruction, using questioning and discussion techniques. So let's first look at the top row and take note of the changes across the ratings from ineffective to highly effective. We see words like low cognitive challenge, moving on to lead students through a single path, on to some low-level questions and some higher-level questions, and then a variety or a series of questions or prompts to challenge students cognitively. You'll notice the quantity and quality indicators increase and decrease throughout the ratings. After you've looked at each row, review the highly effective indicators so we know what best practice of this strand looks like, and move backwards from there. The column we will select for each video is the column that best describes what we see. In your real-world observations, you will have walkthrough data and written or virtual work products to factor in. Remember, you may see this as a phenomenal lesson, but we are zooming in on the unique characteristics of this strand. Prior to watching these videos, we want to express our gratitude to our teachers of the year who've allowed us to use these for a wider audience. We also want to acknowledge that a highly effective overall rating does not mean that every rubric strand is highly effective. All teachers have strengths and places to grow. The key to rater reliability is knowing where to indicate strengths and areas of growth for targeted professional development. First, we'll take a look at Jessica Dion at Rose Pine Elementary School, who will be teaching her science class.
In a forest environment, and originally I had a different plan. I was going to talk to you about what would happen if a fire struck this food web that we just created. But then something big happened in our community this week on Monday. Raise your hand if you can tell me what big thing happened that's very unique for our area. All right, Queen? We had a tornado. In class, was it a little tornado or a big one? Big one. It was for 63 miles. It was very powerful, and sadly, it's affected our ecosystem. So besides the fact that we have people in our community right now that are struggling, let's take a look at this as a scientist. Look at these animals and look at these the plants. Now, imagine if a tornado just ripped through your food web. Can anyone raise their hand and tell me one change that would happen as a result of that? Maybe their shelter, their home. Most of them supposed to in the area. Okay, and they might have to migrate. I heard that word. Good word. Okay. So, do you think this is going to be a 24-hour process? No. No. Now, do you think that the deer in our area are going to go extinct? No. No, it wasn't that significant of a change. But yet it is something that has thrown our environment off kilter. It's made us a little unbalanced. But the beautiful thing about science and Mother Nature is that she always figures out how to fix herself. Now, it might not be quick, and it might not be fast. And you might be driving past this damage on the bus for the next 9 months or longer until all of those trees repair themselves and the berry bushes come back and you see all the deer come back. Because right now, the deer might be moving away from that path of damage. If they're moving away, why do you think they're moving away? Go ahead. They're food source. They don't want to get killed. Maybe they're kind of like in this trauma right now. But eventually, everything's going to balance back out. You know, sometimes nature itself makes our food web unbalanced. It disrupts the flow of things. But sometimes humans are responsible for that. We're going to work on how can humans help out. Mother Nature has a big task. She has a big job of keeping all of these food webs all across the globe straight, balanced. And as good stewards of our environment, we have a responsibility not to make that task harder. So in our next unit, we're going to talk about what are some things we can do to keep everything balanced and healthy. The day after filming.
So take a minute after watching Jessica Dion to reread this entire strand. Highlight the bullet points that best describe what you saw in this short clip. Which column best suits the majority of what you observed? Ideally, each observation would provide a clear picture of each bullet point and fulfill every word on every indicator. But we all know that we are never going to see it exhibited exactly that way in such a short period of time. Adding walkthrough data or written or virtual work products will give you further evidence. The idea of rater reliability is that we can safely place a professional in a column based on all of our evidence. Let's unpack what we saw here as the only evidence that we have. How would you rate Ms. Dion on this strand alone? This is where we begin to note our biases as raters. We may have seen amazing strengths in that lesson. Students working with materials related to recent current events and drawing their own conclusions, and overall a wonderful science lesson. When we hone in on this strand, we note the following reasons why this strand, not the overall teacher rating, is effective proficient. And note, there's not an expectation that a teacher merit every descriptor in a column to earn the rating, but the majority of this descriptor should be accomplished in each indicator. When we bear this in mind, we note the final ratings assigned on this slide. So take a minute. Did you rate the same, higher, lower? You may have good justification for your rating, but take a minute to assess why you landed on the rating that you did and what that means for your own rater reliability. If you look at this slide, you'll notice that she earned effective proficient on each of these rows in this strand only, thus giving us the rating of effective proficient. For our next video, we are going to look at the next domain, instruction, component 3C, engaging students in learning. Take a minute again to pause this video, read across the strands, and note what promotes a teacher from one scoring range to the next. And again, look at the highly effective row to backwards plan your look-fors. A huge thank you to Nakia Graham for her contributions to this training. Let's take a look at her all-girls algebra class at Mansfield High School, in which her mathematicians will be able to prove that exponential functions grow by equal factors over equal intervals.
What is it divided by? The numbers are 40, 43, 46, 49, 52. So it's adding 3, which means that it was in the fraction.
No, because factors are multiply and divide. It's not adding.
Okay, so that means the answer is a yes.
No, it would be no. Because it's not. It's adding. It's supposed to divide or multiply.
I think it's no because it doesn't go at an exponential rate or linear because it goes from 1 to 3, it's plus 2. And then from 2 to 3, it's plus 3. Then 16 is 4. And it's not, at a constant rate. So it's not going to be linear. And it's not multiplying or dividing. So it's not exponential. So I think it's no. No. Because it's added by 3.
So it's not effective because it's adding 3 instead of multiply or divide.
I think this is subtraction of parts.
No, it's actually divided by 2.
So would that make it linear or exponential?
Exponential.
So they were able to prove a back over element that exponential functions, can somebody tell me what an exponential function is? I need a hand. You should be able to know that by now. Michaela. Okay, then good. So a cat for each term found by multiplying or dividing. So we prove with evidence that exponential functions are patterns where each terms are found by multiplying and dividing. Grow means to do what? Increase, okay? They increase by equal factors. What were equal factors again? Okay, then good. So they multiply or divide over equal intervals. Can someone tell me what intervals are? Stages, good.
I was able to meet my lessons objectives. I had a 95% proficiency rate on my exit tickets. After this lesson, my students will continue to look at exponential graphs and tables, and then start creating exponential.
All right, so take a minute to reread this entire strand. Highlight the bullet points that best describe what you saw in the short clip. Which column best suits the majority of what you observed? Again, ideally, each observation would provide a clear picture of each bullet point and fulfill every word on every indicator. And adding walkthrough data and written or virtual work products would give you further evidence that you do not have here. We hope by now this additional part of observation is becoming an apparent necessity for a fair review of a lesson. The idea of rater reliability is that we can safely place a professional in a column based on all of our evidence. Let's unpack what we saw here as the only evidence that we have once again. Looking at each indicator here in this strand, we are able to isolate factors that contribute to the majority of the description on each highly effective indicator, evaluating Nakia Graham as highly effective in this strand. Feel free to pause for a moment if it's helpful to review our supporting data. This final in-person video is a great video to examine using assessment and instruction, this time in a CTE classroom. This final in-person classroom video is a great video to examine using assessment and instruction, this time in a CTE classroom, reminding us that we can learn many lessons on the Compass rubric through non-course subjects as well. Let's again look at the ratings row by row and then backwards plan our look-fors from highly effective. Take a minute to pause and do this if it is helpful to you. And now we'd like for you to meet Shane Thiel, welding instructor from Vermilion Parish. A huge thank you to him for his contributions.
Rods, and I have a lot of undercut right here. I didn't go straight enough. I started turning I didn't go straight enough. I started turning right here. My rod angle.
On this T-joint, I was going down. You know, I could have did better. I started and stopped. I didn't stay, I stayed consistent, but you know, my arch dropped a little bit. You gotta turn your heat down a little bit. Yeah, that buckshot. Yeah, I got a lot of buckshot. The face looks good. Toe looks good. Throat looks very decent.
What is this? Is that a start and stop right there?
Yes, sir. Start and stop.
You use
a dirty rod?
I used a dirty hood.
Yeah. All right, you just kind of tighten up on that start and stop.
On the next side, I did fairly well. A little bit of undercut right there. No undercut at the toe. But as a result, the weld looks very beautiful.
All right, anybody else want to critique his weld? Who wants to look at this weld?
Anybody else?
Okay, how about anybody else's weld that we have in here? What do you think you were doing? You welding too much metal was on the bottom and not enough on the top? Okay. How would he have to correct his the welding too much on one plate, not evenly distributed on both plates? What do you have to do?
You have to keep his hands steady and wouldn't let his hands drop.
Right.
Basically, hold it up. Basically, instead of like before you go flat.
Yeah.
Basically, what you have to do is when you go flat, of course you strike it first, but your hand here, it went from here and it just kept dropping steadily. But you gotta keep your hand up here, that way it'll tie in. You gotta keep going straight. It's the first pass, and then on this one, you gotta go right on top of it. You gotta keep your hand up here still, and then that way it'll tie in right next to it. And on the next pass that you do tomorrow, you'll go start up here, which is the 1-2. You'll go up here, have to tie this one in to it, right next to it. So if it won't be a start and stop, it'll just be a straight pass.
It looks like you was getting out the puddle right here. You probably didn't have your stance right.
All right, let's look at each strand again. Take a couple of minutes to pause and find the strand that best fits the portion of the lesson you observed. Let's see where you land in just a couple of minutes. So again, looking at each indicator in this strand, we were able to isolate factors that contributed to the majority of the description of highly effective indicators, evaluating this class as highly effective for this strand. For our final observation, we will look at a virtual lesson. Before we examine this lesson, let's unpack what we need to understand as observers and evaluators in the year 2020-2021, as it applies to in-person and virtual or digital analog blends that are occurring in our instructional practices. We're going to go through the next few slides that were gifted to us from a nonprofit called the Learning Accelerator, dedicated to helping states, districts, and schools as they navigate the realities, benefits, and needs of remote learning. They write, as educators, our challenge is to figure out how to deliver on the opportunity of remote learning. To do this, we must design and deliver in ways that optimize the benefits and mitigate the potential risks associated with it. Let's examine the best practices in remote learning and translate that knowledge to remote or virtual evaluations. So first, let's get grounded in some basic terminology. Here are two ends of either spectrum of learning. On the left side, we have analog learning. This is our good old-fashioned way of learning in the classroom. Analog learning is not dependent on technology, although you can use technology and can be done offline. This might include some printed materials, independent work, collaborative work through other means like phone calls or even in-person connections where and when possible. On the right side, you see the descriptors for digital learning. Digital learning is technology rich and includes online learning. This might include small groups and one-on-one learning online, or learning and practicing a skill using a digital tool and interacting with a learning management system to follow assignments and work. A challenge that we have this fall will be to think creatively about how to blend both of these to create something new, and then gather the materials we need to effectively evaluate both modalities. Where the learning might take on an analog or digital format, it might also use different modes of time as well. Asynchronous learning is directed and regulated by the learner. This doesn't mean there aren't deadlines for work to be completed. It just means that the learner is taking agency of when the work is getting done. Obviously, we are all familiar with managing our own time toward a deadline, and this is a skill that our students will be able to practice while they work remotely. No one will be hovering over them with timers, and we will need to build the skills of our students to be more effectively manage their time, like they will need to do as they grow older and become professionals. You can see some examples of asynchronous learning listed here on the left side of the table. Likewise, we have synchronous learning, where learning happens together with a group and in real time. This is the traditional way of learning in the classroom, where schedules were controlled by bells and oriented around a regimented structure. You can see some examples of synchronous learning on the right side of this chart. Just as with analog and digital learning, our challenge is to figure out how we offer both opportunities in a remote setting. Blending the two approaches helps us leverage the strengths of each. The modalities that you saw in the chart are the building blocks for creating the student experience for remote instruction. And like any in-person learning experience, teachers need to match the way we learn or the modality with the learning goal. As educators, we do this almost intuitively as part of our process. We think about the learning goal, and then we determine the path to achieve that learning goal. The learning goal should always drive the plan, and that is the same concept that we have been trained to do, only in a different context. Momentarily, we will watch a teacher in West Baton Rouge demonstrate what this looks like. Take a look at this chart and identify what quadrant the majority of those you will evaluate operate within. Are they synchronous and digital, asynchronous and analog and digital? For a fair observation, these factors should determine how we answered the questions in slide 31. Here's a quick reminder of that slide, which you can feel free to return to using the corresponding rater reliability training PDF. We were also able to speak with one of our University View Academy schools that just switched to virtual, but is in a network of pre-existing virtual schools regarding their best practice in virtual evaluations. We want to thank them for sharing the following advice. In both digital, virtual, and the in-person classroom, the professional practice observation score portion of evaluation should pay particular attention to all of the teaching and learning happening, inclusive of walkthrough data and digital and analog written documentation. If we had this information for the videos we just watched, we would be able to provide a more accurate rating. Here are some of the helpful hints for performing a virtual evaluation. One thing pointed out to us is that digital observations provide an opportunity for the evaluated and the evaluator to see the same thing. They also enable playback, so always press record. Calendar out digital walkthroughs. Make sure to test technology platforms in advance so it's not disruptive to the learning process. Plan to collect all evaluative evidence, such as walkthrough observation data and written work products prior to observation so you can gather the whole picture. Prior to observation, ask for evidence as to what is happening in a synchronous, asynchronous, and analog digital format during the observation so your rating accounts for the whole picture, whether in the classroom in person or digitally. A reminder, the classroom alone may not present the full picture in a blended learning environment. For further assistance on conducting digital observations and proper protocol for COVID-19 considerations, please refer to the K-12 Fall 2020 Observation Protocol Guidance document, also located in the Compass Library. So let's return one last time to our pattern of looking across indicators for growth metrics and down the highly effective column to backwards plan our look-fors. In this virtual evaluation, we have multiple components of the lesson to use. With virtual learning, like we've said a few times, we need to bear in mind that the Zoom or Google Meet classrooms we will see are unlikely to show us all of the indicators, as the lessons need to be meticulously front-loaded for students to then work independently while the teacher may move on to the next part of a lesson with a different group of students online. To evaluate this lesson, we are going to use all the materials gathered to look at Domain 1, Planning and Preparation, Component 1C, Setting Instructional Outcomes. This lesson will focus on the Louisiana ELA Standard 4B for fluency. Read on-level text orally with accuracy, appropriate rate, and expression on successive readings. So knowing that teachers are in uncharted territory, we first want to thank Lacey Beal for all she has contributed by allowing us into her virtual classroom in West Baton Rouge and acknowledging how much courage it takes to be transparent with your work, particularly in uncharted territory. The videos we've seen so far are exemplars, and really that's because it's very difficult to find non-exemplars. Please know that there are many ways to teach virtually, so we don't want to set this as the gold standard, but rather as a good exemplar. We'll work to place other examples in the Compass Library throughout the fall. In other words, we want to highlight that we are not setting the expectation that this is the only way. We also want to help all of our teachers grow to increase impact on our students during these difficult times and make sure observations are fair. Let's use our understanding of virtual learning to unpack all that Lacey Beal is doing asynchronously on and off screen. If we only look at a recording of her Synchronous Google Meet, we will not have the full picture of her preparation towards the outcome of a fluency objective. So we'll watch this short video of her lesson, but we'll focus on the supporting materials for this rating. Let's look at all the moving parts Ms. Beal puts into place for her first grade class this past September 29th. Ms. Beal's lesson is both synchronous and asynchronous because she's scheduled to work with first and second grade. So she needs to plan for her students to learn with her and then learn on their own schedules. In order to accomplish this, she uses a reading book, a morning meeting deck, a live Google Meet, and a Flipgrid individual reading responder. If one of these components were not examined in her evaluation, we would miss the mark on all she does. Let's start our evaluation looking at her morning meeting slides. If we were in her class, we would click on the link and it would take us to her live morning meeting where we would then see the next set of slides. We would see virtual sticker charts, a morning warm-up, and then get into the fluency lesson. Next, we have an artifact in her morning meeting slide deck that helps us understand the complexity of her schedule, where it is once again made clear that she will need both synchronous and asynchronous, digital and analog work in order to be live with students all throughout the day. The black squares indicate she needs to prepare asynchronous learning for her first graders as she's working synchronously with her second graders. Once again, we begin to realize that live, virtual, and for that matter, in-person meetings do not always house all our evaluative indicators. They often shift from interpersonal interactions to a method of front-loading learning for asynchronous analog and digital work. Ms. Beal's objective for this 3-day learning cycle is fluency and literacy, an appropriate standard. She has planned to work with fluency with a live lesson on the same story. They will then be ready to read independently, followed by individualized feedback and a real-world connection to the content in the book, Costume Party. Her next slide indicates the fluency objective in first grade language. We read like we speak. We don't talk like robots. We want to pay attention to our punctuation and read with expression. So now she's ready for her Google Meet. She begins by asking students to look at the cover of their book, The Costume Party, to establish context. And you may notice some costumes that coincide.
You see 3 words, okay. What else do we know?
Streamers, like the little
streamer. I'm sorry, streamers. Thank you. Streamers. When do we normally have streamers?
When there's a party.
When there's a party. So I know this must be some kind of party. Okay, let's look at the cover some more. What else do you notice? Are they wearing their school clothes?
No.
No.
I see a police officer.
I see a police officer, a kid police officer. What else do you see?
A baseball player.
A baseball player. Okay, let's hear. Autumn, do you have your book, baby?
All right. So after the live meeting, dressed in costumes, students would then read The Costume Party asynchronously and in analog format. They are directed to practice as much as they like for expression and fluency, and then read into Miss Beal's flip chart. Let's take a look at Captain Ivana.
The costume party. Matt sits on Nick's cot. He says, I am a cat. Tim's cap is on Nick's cot. Tim's bat is on Nick's cot. He says, I am a baseball player. Nick, look.
So now, if you go back to the flip grid, you'll see that she provides feedback to each student individually.
Captain Ivana, I love it. Captain America / Ivana. You did such a good job. I love how I could tell when there was an exclamation mark at the end of the sentences that you read, because you read with expression, which means that you gave your characters a voice. So it almost sounded like the characters were actually reading right then and there, or were actually saying it while you were reading it. So great job on looking ahead and seeing that exclamation mark. And while you're reading, you had the inflection. That means your voice went up. Like, I can be a dragon. That was really awesome. So thank you for leaving me a video of you reading. And I look forward to hearing you read with our new sound next time. Good job.
All right. So after absorbing all these artifacts, we can now rate Ms. Beal's planning and preparation strand. Think about what may have been different if you had not gathered all these supporting materials, written digital materials, and perhaps walked through her virtual room a few times. These are good practices for all classroom settings. So how do we rate Ms. Beal? We can rate this lesson effective proficient. While almost all indicators point to highly effective, as we see by the first three, we could not place the fourth indicator in highly effective, as we would need more evidence of specific outcomes for specific students. This lesson is so close to highly effective, but also a good example of the importance of rate of reliability and gathering all the details. Ms. Beal may very well be highly effective if we could identify the artifacts to shift this indicator. So this could be a good follow-up question in the observation debrief cycle, and pending the answer could shift her effectiveness rating in this strand. In summary, because the majority of descriptors should be present in each indicator for that indicator to be highlighted, and all indicators should be present in an effectiveness column for that effectiveness rating in that strand, the evaluator should access and understand the synchronous, asynchronous, and digital analog components of the lesson being observed. The evaluator should, in best practice, gather all necessary materials for evaluations inclusive of written documents, materials, and walkthroughs to obtain a full picture of instruction regardless of delivery format, and the evaluator should ensure all materials needed for a quality observation are present prior to evaluation. We're now going to have another member of our COMPASS team speak towards the technology or system of record, the COMPASS information system.
Good afternoon, everybody. Due to the extenuating circumstances with COVID-19, all evaluations were waived. There will be a note saying score not calculated in the COMPASS information system. School systems may have entered data into COMPASS for formative purposes, such as your incomplete evaluations codes, but no evaluations were made. In COMPASS, you have two different levels. You have the LEA and the site level. The LEA level is pretty much like central office. This is where your LEA admins and your supervisors would be placed. At the LEA level, you can see all of the sites that are in the same sponsor code. If you are at the site level, you can only see things that are at your site, and if you're an evaluator, only people that you are assigned to evaluate. There's two roles at the LEA level. You have the LEA administrator and you have the supervisory role. The LEA admins are the people that have the ability to add, edit, move, and delete records. They serve kind of as your data manager, security coordinator. This role is not evaluated. Supervisors will be able to see everything if they are at the LEA level, but they cannot move and modify accounts. That is the LEA admin role. Both of these job titles should be put in as other. All right, so the LEA admin, remember, these are the people, they are the only ones allowed to set up accounts. They modify, they add, they move, they transfer. They also assign evaluators. So this position should not be held by personnel that needs an evaluation. If you are a single site sponsor, you should not give this role to your principal or teacher because you can't have multiple accounts. This should be given to someone like HR personnel or someone who has a lifetime certificate that does not need to be evaluated for further certification. All right, so setting your user levels, the LEA admin has this ability. You would go to the employee tab, go to the view list, select the person that you would like. The line will turn yellow, and then go to the maintain tab. This will let you update, add, or delete information. So if you do not have anybody selected, it will come up blank like this. You would enter the person's social security number and the LEA that they are at, click add. Then you'd put in their name, job title, are they a certified evaluator, what site is this person at, and what user group they are in. This is also where you'd put in the reason for incomplete evaluations if someone resigns, transfers, retires, etc. So there are 3 user groups at the site level. You have the supervisor, who would be listed as a 99 other. the supervisory role is at both the LEA or the site level. It has the same ability. The supervisor can see everything. The evaluator would be your principals and assistant principals, and so they would be listed as 04. They generally serve as your evaluators at that site, and they can only see the personnel that they are assigned at that site. Employees consist of your 01 teachers, your 02 librarians, and your 03 counselors. They can only see their own information, and then they will be able to see their own record as they go from site to site. All right. So when you add a new employee, you would go to the Maintain tab. You must enter something for each field that has an asterisk. So you would start with the Social Security number and the LEA. Then you'd click Add. It should auto-populate if they're in the Security tab. If they are brand new or have been deleted, you would just enter their first and last name, their job title role, which is appropriate to them. If they're going to be an evaluator, you must have this training, and you must put that they are certified evaluator yes here. Remember, depending on their home base site, it depends on what they can see. So if they're at the site level, they can only see the site. If they're at the LEA level, they can see everything. And then their user group. Once you are finished, hit Add. If you are modifying a record, you'd hit Update. So modifying an employee, if you need to transfer someone, if you need to change their name due to marriage or whatever, if they have changed their job title, if they are now an evaluator. When we roll people over, we do not roll over the evaluator yes. Everybody starts the year as evaluator no. You can change their site, you can change their user group, and then you can put in their incomplete evaluation reason. You can also delete the selected person by clicking the delete button twice. In the report tab, you will see various reports that you can run for the current year that you're in. This will not change years. If you click the completion of evaluation tab, that will bring up a list that will give you kind of overall statistics of how your LEA is doing, total number in, people with assigned evaluators, number of SLTs, number of observations. As you keep selecting down, you can get to the site level, and then you can get to the employee level. So this is what it would look like. Once you click it, it would show you a picture of your total number of employees. How many of them have an assigned evaluator? How many of them have had 2 observations? How many of them have 2 SLTs? You can actually click to your sites. It will show you, in green, what steps have been done. It's a nice thing to be looking at as you go through the year. All right, and here is your action step and calendars for evaluations. We rolled Compass over on September 10th. It will stay open until September 9th of 2021. At this time, you should be updating your rosters, adding your new hires, and transferring your personnel that came from other LEAs. You have until December to get this done. You should also be setting up your SLTs. And then throughout the year, you conduct your observations and enter your scores, and rate your SLTs and enter your professional practice and SLT scores. With your non-BAM teacher, or all teachers are non-BAM for this year, so for the end of May. And then we have resources for our Compass administrators. You can find this at the Compass library. You have the bulletin and resources to show you how to navigate Compass. Thank you.
So as we come to the conclusion of the 2020-2021 Rater Reliability Training, go back to your KWL chart from the beginning. We hope we've been able to answer your questions, and if not, please reach out to us at your convenience. Also, we need to make sure that you fill out the survey linked in the companion Rater Reliability PDF, which will serve as your certificate of completion, and a reminder that this training is required per policy prior to any summative evaluations. We'll update the completion records of this survey monthly in the Compass library. So this update will be posted in lieu of the certificates that were sent out in years past. We'll close this training with sincere gratitude for all you have done and are doing to guide our staff, students, and families through all that is learned in these difficult times. Thank you again. Please feel free to reach out at any time to our Compass inbox with follow-up questions. We're keeping you in our hearts and thoughts throughout this year as you help make our professional staff feel supported, and through that support, be their very best for our students.